Welcome ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to look at QUORA questions and we're going to try to answer those questions. Now this is a bit of a different approach from my normal YouTube videos, but I hope you guys enjoy this new concept as well. Now let's get going. We arrived at the first question and the question is, in your opinion, what is the best tank destroyer of World War II? Now in my opinion it's going to be the Stuk 3G. It's probably going to be a pretty popular opinion, of course, but it is probably the best choice here. Now the reason why I chose the Stuk 3G is because it was armed with the 75mm L48 if I recall correctly. And the thing is, in 1944 alone the Stuk 3G claimed 20,000 kills in armored fighting vehicles just over its entirety. So tanks, tank destroyers and so on. Which is impressive when you consider that the Stuk 3 was only produced 9,000 times, of course, being the second most produced armored fighting vehicle from Germany throughout the entire Second World War, but those numbers pale in comparison, of course, to the T-34 from the Soviet Union and the M4 Sherman from the Americas. So during the entirety of the Second World War, Germany was one of these few countries which really put all its eggs in a basket, and the basket was called the tank destroyer. Now the Soviet Union also used tank destroyers and so did the USA, but those weren't as effective as the Germans. So for example, the Soviet Union used the Su-100, the Su-85, the ISU and the Su-152. Now all of those are pretty good, but they haven't been mass produced to a point that they really made a significant impact on the war. The same is with the United States. So you had the Hellcat, the Jackson and the Wolverine and probably a couple more. They didn't have as much of an impact on the entirety of the war as the Stuk 3 did. Now Germany, for example, had the Stuk 3, the Hetzer 38T, the Jagdpanther, the Jagdpanzer and the Jagdtiger and the Nashorn and probably a couple more. And still the point is that the Stuk 3, out of all of those, it's probably not even the most powerful. But it still is the top dog in terms of the numbers, in terms of the kill ratio, in terms of how useful it actually was in most scenarios. Now you could make a case for the Hetzer 38T. It was produced around 3,000 times. It saw production in the last 60 months of the war, if I recall correctly. I think from 1944, either the beginning of 1944 or the middle of 1944, one of those two. And it was produced around 3,000 times. So it was also pretty cheap to produce. It used the 75mm as well. So you could make a case for that tank as well, a tank destroyer as well. But my choice will be the Stuk 3. So we've arrived at our second question. Was the Sherman tank really the worst tank of World War II, or is this just a documentary myth? Now, I could say that the Sherman tank was a great tank. Of course with the 75mm, the 105mm and the 76mm. And that it had a good combination of anti-tank capabilities, anti-infantry capabilities and anti-light vehicle capabilities. It also had a good frontal armor. I could say all of that, but I think a better way is to say it that other countries had far, far worse tanks over the course of the entire Second World War. Well, you could say, okay Colin, give me an example. I will give you an example. You could look at basically every single Japanese tank of World War II, except probably the Type 3 Chinu, which was stationed on the island of Kyushu, so was never really a threat to basically either the Chinese or the Allies. You could also say, okay, but that's just Japan. Japan didn't really focus on tanks, so can you give me another example? Fine, I'll give you another one. Look at Italy. Italy's M1139s, M1340s, M1342s, all of those tanks, they weren't great. They really weren't great. Not in anti-tank capabilities, not in safety, not in basically anything. Top speed, reliability, stuff like that. It's not amazing. So yeah, it definitely is a documentary myth. So we come on to the third question of QUORA. What is the best looking tank of World War II and what's the ugliest? Now, of course, everyone is going to have its own opinion, and if you have your opinion, let me know in the comment section down below. Now, I can't say the Jagdpanther because it's not a tank, and I can't say the Centurion because it only came after the Second World War. It's a Cold War era vehicle. Now, my 3 picks are going to be 1, the King Tiger. If you see it in the wild, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's stunning, it looks fierce, it's amazing. I saw it in Belgium. My second pick is going to be the IS-2. The IS-2, I haven't seen that one in real life, but it looks absolutely gorgeous as well. Massive main armament, it just looks like an absolute monster. And the third pick is going to be the Panther. The Panther, of course, being one of the best well-rounded vehicles of the Second World War, and in my opinion that one looks stunning as well. Now, the worst looking tank, the ugliest tank of the Second World War, is probably going to be the Matilda 1. Now, the reason for why I chose the Matilda 1 is because, well, just look at its main armament, just look at all the armor plates, it just doesn't work well together. It's ugly because it basically has nothing. It looks incredibly weak, not frightening at all, and in my opinion what makes a tank beautiful is when it looks either incredibly well-rounded like the Panther or incredibly fierce and battle-scarred, which both the IS-2 and the King Tiger do. We have officially arrived at the 4th question, and the question is, what is the most underrated tank during World War II? Now, I've seen some people say the Panzer 30 great choice. But it's always difficult to exactly pinpoint what is underrated and what's overrated, but we'll try to do our best anyway. Now, one of the tanks which in my opinion is underrated, incredibly underrated, to the point that I even say that it's the most underrated tank of World War II, is the Matilda 2. I might be a little bit biased because it's one of my favorite tanks of the Second World War. I'd say like 4th, 5th place. But I actually have facts to back it up. So one of the reasons why I find it underrated is because nobody really talks about the fact that a Matilda 2 has fought in every single theater of the Second World War. Now, when I say every single theater, I mean, of course, with the Australians in the Pacific, with the Russians in Soviet Russia, with the English in both Egypt and in France, and it performed quite well, at least as far as I know. Now, for example, in France, the Germans really only had the Panzer III, which was supposed to be their anti-tank workhorse, and they had the Panzer IV, which was supposed to be anti-fortifications and anti-personnel. Now, the Panzer III couldn't frontally even challenge the Matilda II because it got 78mm of frontal armor, which by that time was a lot. To put it into perspective, 18mm, so that's 2mm more, was the standard about 3 years after 1940 for medium tanks. Okay, medium tanks, but you get the point. It was ahead of its time in terms of armor protection. Now, furthermore, it was running amok in Italy. No, sorry, not in Italy, in Italian Ethiopia and in Italian Libya. Sorry, misspoke there. Anyway, it was running amok there, and the Italians really didn't have an answer to the Matilda II over there. And when it got shipped Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union decided to put a stronger main armament in a Matilda, and that was of course the 76mm ZES-5, which made it even more competent. However, by the time it already was a bit outdated, so there's that. But for a tank to be so much better than everything else by the time on the battlefield is quite impressive and underrated in my opinion. So now we have arrived at the last question: what is a Centurion tank? Now, the Centurion tank is a tank which was designed and created during World War II, but only saw service after World War II. Now, the Centurion has had a couple of different main armaments, but one of its best main armaments actually used on the Centurion was the 105mm L7. Now, this main armament was incredibly powerful and kept the Centurion throughout its entire career, its entire service career, relevant on the battlefield. Now, the 105mm has taken on a lot of adversaries in the name of the M48 Patton and a couple of T versions. Now, let's start off with the M48 Patton. They faced the M48 Patton, of course, in the war between India and Pakistan, where the Centurion came out as the better tank than the M47 and the M48 Pattons from the United States. Furthermore, the Centurions served in the Israeli army and became known as the Shoati, and they were serving in the Israeli army where they were fighting Soviet tanks, so the T-54 and the T-55, and they absolutely decimated them. On the battle for Golan Heights, they fought, I think, T-62s and T-55s, T-54s, and they were outnumbered 5-1, and they still came out victorious. That just goes to show how good actually the SHO Ts were, but also the Centurions, and probably also the crews. Now, of course, like every other tank, it isn't invincible. It didn't have the greatest amount of frontal armor, but it still was a very impressive tank nonetheless. Overall, arguably one of the best tanks of the entire Cold War, but that could be argued for another tank as well. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I did my best to make this new concept appealing to you guys. If you guys enjoyed this new concept, let me know in the comment section down below. Also, if I made some mistakes or some errors, let me know in the comment section down below. Feedback, especially feedback, is incredibly valued. Now, I want to thank my channel members, VW, German, Luca and Sander, for being members of my channel. If you want to watch another video, you can do so, and I'll see you guys in the next video.